Hey guys, tonight we're following a trail of snail slime across sun-drenched stones and into one of the most quietly baffling corners of ancient architecture, those odd, breathtaking, slightly too symmetrical temples of Malta. You know the ones if you've ever stumbled across travel documentaries at 2 a or flipped through a coffee table book labeled Mysteries of the Mediterranean. These temples are in there somewhere. Wide slabs of weathered limestone, spiral carvings that look suspiciously like a toddler doodled with a compass, and doorways that seem made for people who were either very small or deeply committed to limbo as a spiritual practice. But what if I told you right as you're tucking in that these temples may have been built with migrating snails in mind? You probably won't survive this. Not from danger. Oh no, it's just that the sheer velocity of boredom might lull you into a coma faster than you can say gastropod alignment theory. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the early light of a Maltese dawn, the stone beneath your bare feet already warm from a Mediterranean breeze that hasn't even arrived yet. The temple looms ahead, or perhaps it just sits there like a cat pretending not to watch you. Each slab of ancient limestone is weathered smooth, with joints tight enough to make modern engineers blush. You walk slowly, trailing your fingers along the walls, feeling the faint curves of spirals carved ages ago with tools no more advanced than persistence and prayer. The temple you're exploring might be Menajdra or Hagar Team. It doesn't matter. They all share something subtle. They're oriented not just to the heavens, but to something more grounded. The entrances are positioned so precisely that on certain mornings each year, the first ray of sunlight passes directly through a corridor and touches a particular stone. That's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Many Maltese megalithic temples are astronomically aligned, particularly with the spring and autumn equinoxes. They were likely built around 3600 BCE, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. But here's your quirky tidbit. Some researchers noticed that the alignments also correspond vaguely, weirdly, consistently with the seasonal migrations of a local snail species. That's right. Tiny shelled creatures, inching their way across sun-warmed stone, might have once served as little calendars with eyeballs on stalks. Historians still argue whether this alignment is deliberate, coincidental, or a delightful accident caused by someone misreading ancient farming almanacs while mildly dehydrated. Still, you crouch by a wall and notice them snails. Dozens, no, hundreds. Their trails glisten faintly, catching the rising sun in silver arcs. They're all headed the same way, slow and oddly purposeful, like a marching band after a wine tasting. You sit there a while, watching. The stone feels good against your back. The snails don't speak, obviously, but their movement has rhythm. Their arrival always just before a seasonal ceremony seems suspiciously timed, too poetic to ignore, too gooey to be dignified. And someone, long ago, clearly noticed. You rise and walk into the temple's heart. The inner chamber is dark, cool, and slightly damp not because of poor drainage, but because these people, whoever they were, wanted it that way. The smell is faintly mineral and mossy. You breathe it in. This is where light, time, and stone converge. You sit cross-legged beneath a carved arch, spirals winding above you like thoughts on the edge of sleep. And outside, the snails keep coming. You wake in the courtyard, tucked gently against a lichen-flecked boulder that once served probably as an altar, or maybe just a really popular napping stone. The kind of sacred thing that gets sacred mainly because enough people kept sitting on it. The sun isn't up yet, but the sky has that pre-dawn lavender hue that makes even large insects look poetic. Your fingers brush through short tufts of temple grass, resilient, springy stuff that grows defiantly between cracks in the stone and just a few feet from your face. A snail makes its entrance, gracefully, slowly, as if it knows this is a temple and it should probably behave accordingly. You sit up slowly, stretching as quietly as one can in a structure built entirely from rocks that seem deeply suspicious of sudden movement. You're inside a Neolithic temple, but not in the usual roped-off, museum-protected kind of way. You're in it. Morning dew clings to the worn floor. The birds haven't dared speak yet, and neither have the goats, who are, for some reason, very much present and already judging your posture. In the early morning quiet, you can hear them, the snails. Not audibly, of course. That would be terrifying, but there's a presence to their movement. Tiny glistening trails are already forming across the stones, connecting points that no human map has ever charted. Some trails loop, some spiral, some, most confusingly, form what appears to be a highly judgmental, frowny face. Your mainstream historical fact here is that these temples, with their central courtyards and shallow chambers, were likely built for communal use gatherings, rituals, astronomical observations. They were not tombs. There's almost no evidence of burial use. Instead, they're more like observatories built by people who didn't own shoes but understood the sky better than most of us ever will. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. In 1998, a group of amateur archaeologists visiting Giganteja noticed that a specific species of Maltese land snail, Trochoidea sprati, migrated annually through the temple courtyard. Every spring, every year, like they'd booked it on a calendar, packed a snack, and set off on their sluggish pilgrimage. Historians still argue whether this observation holds any real merit, or whether it was just an over-caffeinated coincidence. Some say it's proof of a lost natural calendar. Others say it's what happens when people stare at mollusks for too long and start projecting meaning out of sheer boredom. But here's where it gets weird, because in your half-dreaming state, you start to notice something that no peer-reviewed journal ever dares publish. The snails are heading directly for a small triangular notch carved in the eastern wall. Not a grand arch, not a dazzling sunlit portal. A little notch, barely big enough for a vole, but just big enough to catch the first sliver of sunrise as it sneaks in. One snail pauses at the base of the notch, and again, we're deep in speculative territory here, nods. Not with its head, obviously, but with that peculiar full-body shift snails do when they're feeling particularly smug. You inch closer. The notch isn't decorative. It's placed just off-center, in a way that seems accidental, but given how obsessively precise these temple builders were, definitely isn't. When the sun finally crests the horizon, a thin blade of gold slides through the notch and hits a small rock embedded in the floor. That rock, shaped unmistakably like a spiral, you blink, then squint. The sunlight flares, catches dew on the snails' trails, and suddenly the whole courtyard lights up like a disco designed by Moss. Coincidence? Maybe. You lean back, heart slowing, eyes adjusting. The snails aren't in a hurry. They're never in a hurry, but somehow, they always arrive at just the right moment, like sleepy astronomers, like quiet monks, like little shelled prophets who know exactly when to show up and when to nap. You, however, are still figuring that part out. You shuffle across the stones, still barefoot, still a little bewildered by the quiet theater of snails. The temple stretches ahead of you, a shallow labyrinth of short doorways, curved chambers, and that one suspiciously low ceiling that absolutely nobody warns you about until you've clocked your forehead against it. The limestone underfoot is warm now, not hot, just sun-kissed, soft enough from centuries of footsteps and erosion that it almost feels like walking on bone. If bone were made of history and gentle regret. You move deeper into the temple, and as the light strengthens, the shadows shift and the carvings begin to reveal themselves. Spirals, so many spirals, big spirals that loop across doorway lintels, small spirals scratched into corners like forgotten doodles, spirals that double back on themselves and vanish into nothing. Some of them feel deliberate, symbolic. Others, less so, like maybe some ancient kid got bored during a religious ceremony and decided to contribute to the sacred geometry by way of snail-inspired graffiti. That brings us to your mainstream historical fact for this leg of the journey. The Maltese temple builders use nothing but stone tools to carve out these immense structures. Stone hammers, antler picks, and a deep-rooted patience that modern humans usually reserve for assembling IKEA furniture. The stones themselves, mostly coralline limestone, were quarried locally and dragged into place using wooden rollers, ropes, and, one can assume, a truly staggering number of curses in Proto-Maltese. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some of the spiral patterns carved into the temples appear to follow the exact natural paths left by common land snails. As in, these weren't random swirls. These were meticulous copies of the kinds of looping trails you'd find on a damp morning if you got really, really bored and decided to stare at snail trails until meaning appeared, which, apparently, someone did. Historians still argue whether these spirals are symbolic of life cycles, astronomical patterns, spiritual journeys, or whether someone just had an elaborate artistic obsession with gastropods. Some even suggest the spirals mimic sound waves and early visual language for chanting frequencies. Others, well, they argue that snailology isn't a real thing, and everyone needs to go outside more. But you remain inside, because you're not here to argue. You're here to wander. And wander you do. The chambers twist and overlap like the inside of a conch shell. You duck beneath a low passage, where the stone on either side has been worn smooth by hands, thousands of them, who once traced these very walls. At the end of the corridor, a circular niche opens like a waiting mouth, its inner walls decorated with more spirals, more ridges, more signs that whoever built this didn't just want to mark time. They wanted to shape it. The air in here is still, but not stale. It smells like cool earth and morning breath. A few snails cling to the walls silent, observant, as if they're the true custodians of this temple, and you're merely a guest. You sit. The stone beneath you isn't exactly comfortable, but it's oddly reassuring. Like it remembers every person who's ever perched here. You lean against the wall and follow one of the spirals with your eyes. It loops and loops and loops. And just when you think it's about to end, it doubles back and vanishes into a crack you hadn't noticed before. Much like your thoughts. You close your eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleats. Rude. But mostly, it's quiet. This is a space built for sound to behave. If you speak, the walls catch your words and toss them back in soft echoes. If you breathe deeply, the temple seems to inhale with you. You wonder how many people have sat just here, snail watchers, stone carvers, sunrise waiters, and thought, yes, this is the spot. You wonder if snails have a favorite spot. 2. You linger in the stillness of that spiral-wrapped niche, half meditating, half hoping the snails don't start a cult and induct you as their very slow-moving prophet. The shadows grow longer in reverse now, bending toward the west as the sun climbs higher. And still, the snails keep gliding methodical, oblivious, and deeply unbothered by human existential crises. As you shift and stretch your legs, something catches your attention. Not movement this time, but arrangement. Along the floor of this corridor, nestled between carved stone ridges, you notice a neat line of small, round depressions. Too regular to be accidental. They're not footprints. They're not weather-worn dips. They look deliberate. You lean in close. Inside one of them, a snail. Inside another snail. All moving in the same direction. The pattern is unmistakable. Someone, thousands of years ago, carved a little dotted pathway into solid stone. And today, with the nonchalance of creatures that didn't get the memo about how extinct their religion might be, snails are following that very path. Your mainstream historical fact is that many Maltese temples were designed with patterned floor features. Grooves, cup marks, basin-like depressions. Archaeologists believe they might have been used for libations, offerings, or astronomical observations using shadow and liquid, but no one agrees on what all of them were for. Now here's your quirky tidbit. One obscure study suggested that those depressions might have helped guide the movement of sacred animals during rituals. Livestock, maybe, but snails? That wasn't in the footnotes. Historians still argue whether these floor patterns were ritual guides, drainage systems, or early board games that got out of hand. But one thing they don't argue is that the precision of these carvings implies a society deeply invested in symbolism, geometry, and the slow passage of time, which, conveniently, is what snails are all about. You run your hand along the groove, gentle, shallow, slightly damp with dew. It doesn't feel like a random mark. It feels like a road. or a vein. Something essential, something connecting. You follow it because of course you do. The groove leads to a small chamber off to the side. One you hadn't noticed before. Not grand, no carvings, just simple stone walls, bare and smooth. But the light here is perfect diffuse. Golden, sleepy. You almost expect a curtain of incense to appear, or a bowl of grapes, or an overly judgmental priest in sandals. Instead, you get a goat. It blinks at you slowly, chewing something crunchy and deeply unidentifiable. You blink back for a moment. It feels like a standoff. Then, you both silently agree not to acknowledge what just happened. You sit down again more slowly this time and watch, not the goat, the light. It catches the upper edge of the chamber, throwing slow-motion shadows across the wall, one by one. Snails appear in the doorway, silhouetted like squishy little pilgrims. They don't seem to know you're there. Or maybe they do. Maybe they're just ignoring you until you prove yourself worthy by gliding an inch an hour across limestone. The air smells faintly of herbs, wild thyme maybe, or the ghost of someone's lunch from 3600 BCE. You let yourself breathe it in. This isn't just a ruin, it's a breathing thing. A long-lost memory with moss on it. And those carved paths, they're everywhere. Now that you know what to look for, winding across the floor, up the walls, even tracing little arcs into the ceiling, which seems ridiculous unless you know how persistent snails can be. You lie back. Above you, spiral carvings mimic the cosmos. The groove on the floor points due east. The snails glide through it like clock hands made of goo. You close your eyes, not to sleep yet, just to listen. Outside, the wind is starting up a soft breeze from the sea, carrying salt and sunshine. And the faint cry of a bird, you're pretty sure is arguing with a lizard. Inside, it's cooler, stiller, and there's a weight to the quiet. Not heaviness, exactly, just a sense of presence. Something was remembered here, maybe not by name, but by motion, by repetition, by returning, again and again, to this place, to these carvings, to these slow, deliberate trails. And here you are, doing the same, like a snail or a priest, or a very confused time traveler with dirt on their socks. You wake again, or maybe you never really fell asleep. It's hard to tell in a place that bends time so subtly. The light has changed, less golden now, more muted. That soft, late morning tone that makes everything feel like it's wearing a filter. The goat is gone, probably off to choose something historically significant, but the snails, still here, always here. You sit up and notice that the groove you traced earlier splits in two like a fork in a very small, very ancient road. One path snakes left, around the back of a toppled wall. The other curves right into what looks like a dead end. Naturally, you choose the dead end because it feels like the snails would. You follow the shallow carving with your fingers, walking low and slow, practically in a crawl. And there, tucked behind the broken wall, is a chamber barely big enough for 2 people or 1 person and a truly ambitious snail. There are no carvings here, no dramatic altars or spiral motifs, just a small flat stone, perfectly level, bathed in a shaft of sunlight filtering through a crack in the ceiling. It feels like a place where decisions were made, quietly, without drama. Maybe someone once stood here to make a vow, or to whisper something to the walls. Or maybe this was just a spot to rest your arms after dragging a 20-ton stone uphill barefoot. Your mainstream historical fact is this. Archaeologists agree that these temples were likely built by a matrilineal society. Women featured prominently in surviving figurines and sculptures. Fertility, rebirth, cycles of the moon. These themes show up again and again. It's not just that women were present, it's that they may have been the ones running the show. And now your quirky tidbit. One particular statue, known as the Sleeping Lady, was found in the Hypogeum, a temple carved entirely underground. The figure is reclining on her side, eyes closed, one arm tucked under her head like she's taking a nap on the job. She's robust, peaceful, undeniably comfortable. And she looks smug, like she knows something we don't. Historians still argue whether this figure represents a goddess, a dreamer, a priestess, or just someone who finally got to lie down after a long morning of herding ceremonial goats. Some suggest she represents the earth itself alive, female, and always resting, always watching. Others say she was just a sculpture carved by someone who desperately wanted a nap. Either way, you feel her presence in this tiny chamber, not literally, but as an idea. The sense that this spot, unassuming and quiet, was meant for restoration, a recharge point. A place where decisions weren't shouted, but whispered into stone. You lie back, imitating the sleeping lady, one arm beneath your head, eyes scanning the crack of sky above. And as the sunlight shifts, you see it, a flicker of movement against the light. Not a bird, not a bug, a snail. Yes, really. It's climbing along the inner edge of the ceiling, hugging the groove like it's a rail. Inch by inch, it glides through the light, leaving a faint, sparkling trail behind. The effect is oddly beautiful, like a comet's tail streaking across the firmament. If the comet was incredibly small and carried its house with it, you breathe in, deeply. There's a smell here, Stone, yes, but also something sweet and fermented. You think of milk curdling in the sun, not rotten, but ancient, transformed, as if someone used to make cheese right here, as an offering or a snack, or both. Your stomach grumbles, rude. You try to focus again, but your mind begins to wander, the way it always does in quiet places. You think about how the people who built this must have moved slowly, not because they were lazy, but because they understood pace, rhythm. They moved like the snails, like the stars, like something that knew time was a spiral, not a line. Maybe that's what the temples are really aligned with. Not just the sun or the moon or the stars. Maybe they're aligned with patience, with breath, with the kind of wisdom that doesn't arrive in grand revelations, but in slow movements, one gliding inch at a time. The snail disappears into the crack. You remain. You don't rush out of the tiny chamber. That would be rude, or at least deeply out of sync with the overall vibe. You give the snail time to vanish, the light time to drift, and your own limbs. Time to remember what it's like to stand up after lying flat on sun-warmed stone for longer than is medically recommended. Eventually, you ease yourself upright and step out into the open corridor again. This time, you take the left-hand groove, the one that spiraled away from the fork and led deeper into the temple complex. It winds gently, like a river that refuses to hurry. The walls on either side close in slightly, and the air cools down. It smells of moss and dust and something almost metallic. You press your hand to the stone. Cool, rough, dimpled with little scoops that look suspiciously like they were made to cradle snail shells. You can't help but imagine some ancient artisans scooping out those divots, whistling off-key, while their prize snail companions supervise the whole process from the rime of a clay bowl. Your mainstream historical fact here is that many of the surviving Maltese temples follow the same architectural layout, a central corridor leading to semicircular apses, forming a cloverleaf or trefoil design. This layout wasn't random. It echoed the human body or the divine feminine form, depending on who you ask, and was likely deeply symbolic. Now for the quirky tidbit. Among the figurines found at these sites is a small clay figure with a shell-like bun of hair and wide, staring eyes. Some fringe researchers affectionately refer to her as Snail Priestess. Why? Because her elaborate coiffure resembles a coiled shell, and her hunched posture makes her look like she's about to offer a particularly juicy lettuce leaf to a gastropod god. Historians still argue whether this figure is actually connected to snails at all, or whether she's just a fashionable worshiper who enjoyed dramatic hairstyles. Some propose the figurine represents fertility rites. Others think she might have been a fertility amulet. A few brave souls even claim the figure resembles a humanoid mollusk hybrid, but those people were kindly asked to leave the archaeology conference early. Back in your corridor, the carvings shift. You notice that while many of the earlier spirals were loose, relaxed, and meandering, these are tighter, coiled like springs, almost tense, like the artists were concentrating harder, or maybe working through something emotionally, or maybe they were just running low on carving space. You pause at a particularly intense carving, a perfect double spiral, carved so deeply into the wall that it casts a shadow even in the faintest light. You trace the pattern with your finger. It hums, almost imperceptibly, like a whisper made of rock. You lean in, half expecting to hear a voice. Instead, your forehead bumps the wall again. You sigh. Still smarter than most reality shows. You keep going. The corridor opens into another chamber. This one large, circular, and acoustically peculiar. Your steps bounce off the walls and come back to you flatter, quieter. Like a polite cough in a cathedral, a few snails dot the rim of the doorway, their trails leaving ghostly arcs across the dust. In the center of the chamber, a raised altar-like block, smooth and rectangular, with faint etchings around the edge. You step closer. The etchings form another spiral, but this one is different. It isn't symmetrical. It loops in, then stops suddenly, jags sideways, then loops again. It looks confused or broken. You kneel and examine it more closely. Could it be a map, a ritual path, a spiral inspired by a particularly rebellious snail? No one knows. That's the thing about these temples. You can study them, measure them, diagram them down to the last microgroove. But you'll never quite get into the heads of the people who built them. Not completely. The temples aren't explanations. They're invitations. And so you sit again, because sitting, it seems, is what this place wants you to do. You watch the dust dance in the light, settling slowly onto stone that has outlived 100 empires. You watch a snail inch its way across the altar, pausing occasionally as if considering its next philosophical move. Time passes. The spiral doesn't explain itself. Neither does the snail. But somehow, both make perfect sense. You leave the spiral chamber slowly, as though the air itself resists your movement. It's not heavy, just expectant, like the stone walls are watching, quietly judging your decision to rejoin the corridor rather than stay and ponder spirals for another few hours. You can almost hear them mutter, "Well, we offered the mystery. Can't say we didn't try." You shuffle back into the passage, brushing against limestone that has been fingerprinted by millennia of curious hands. The grooves underfoot grow deeper, here more purposeful. They no longer seem decorative or accidental. These are wear paths, trails of repetition, routes trodden by sandaled feet, ceremonial boots, or bare soles calloused by generations of sacred pacing. You stop suddenly. Up ahead, the corridor veers left and opens into another room. This one isn't shaped like any of the others. It's angular, asymmetrical, and partly collapsed on one side, revealing a sliver of blue sky and a crooked fig tree poking through a crevice like it's trying to peek in on history. And sprawled on the floor, at first you think it's just more rubble, is a curious thing. A slab. But not just any slab. This one is etched with tiny circles, arranged in neat, repetitive rows, like the world's oldest braille or a very patient snail's pinball table. The indentations are precise and uniform, about the size of your thumbnail. You run your hand over them, and the stone ripples under your fingers like it's trying to whisper instructions for a very boring board game. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many Maltese temples feature what archaeologists call cup marks. These small carved pits are arranged in lines, circles, and clusters. They're found near altars, thresholds, and offering spots, and while no one knows their exact function, they appear with enough frequency to suggest significance, possibly for counting, calendrical purposes, or ritual tracking. And now, for the quirky tidbit, one theory put forth by a particularly creative archaeologist during a very hot summer suggests these cup marks might have held snail slime samples. Yes, you heard that right. Some believe these ancient Maltese may have observed snail trails to track humidity patterns or seasonal changes, and the marks could have served as tiny observation bowls. Snail meteorology, basically primitive weather forecasting through slime. Historians still argue whether the cup marks were practical, ceremonial, or purely decorative. Some lean towards celestial alignments, little stone star charts, or markers of lunar cycles. Others say they're tally marks from rituals we'll never fully understand. And at least one poor soul insists they're simply ancient board games, the Maltese equivalent of travel chess, but with snails as game pieces and eternal mystery as the prize. You sit beside the slab and try to picture it. A solemn priest, hunched over in a thick wool tunic, placing one snail in each cup, murmuring observations like, "too slimy," rain coming, or maybe a child, bored during a long ritual, poking their fingers into each groove, giggling when a snail pops its head out in response. You pick up a pebble and try to fit it in one of the marks. It nestles in perfectly, making a soft clack sound that echoes gently off the chamber walls. You do it again and again until you've placed 5 in a row. Congratulations, you've invented the world's slowest and most archaeologically inaccurate version of Connect 4. The fig tree overhead shifts in the breeze. Its leaves rattle like distant applause. You lie back beside the slab and gaze up through the cracked roof at the patch of sky. A snail, not on the ceiling this time, but resting quietly on a leaf, catches the light with its shell, golden and slightly iridescent. You wonder, not for the first time, whether the ancients noticed that shimmer and thought it sacred. Maybe they saw it as a gift, a reminder that even the slowest creatures carry beauty with them. Or maybe they just like the taste. The moment stretches, the wind rises and dies again. You let your eyes close, just for a moment, while the pebbles stay tucked in their cups like silent sentinels. The fig leaf waves lazily, and the snails, well, they keep doing what they've always done, which is everything. Very, very slowly, the fig leaf flutters overhead, and something about its rhythm pulls you gently upright again. You brush the dust from your clothes, not because it bothers you, but because it's the polite thing to do in a place like this. Temples, even the half-collapsed ones with fig trees and questionable board games, deserve a little decorum. You step away from the slab of mysterious divots and move deeper into the complex. This next stretch of corridor is narrower than before. You have to turn slightly sideways to squeeze through, and your shoulder brush is stone smooth by thousands of years of accidental polishing. Ceremonial robes, maybe, or bored temple guards leaning and sighing through the centuries. The light shifts again, cooler now, tinged with blue. A shaft of it filters in through a vent-like slit carved high in the wall, illuminating a pedestal at the end of the hall. On it, a shallow stone bowl filled with what looks like tiny, sun-dried spiral shells. Snails again. You lean in. They're empty. Of course, long-abandoned shells, bleached pale by centuries of Maltese sun. Some are broken, others whole. One is painted faint lines of red ochre winding around it like a maze. You reach out, then pause. Better not. Not because it feels forbidden, but because you don't want to jinx the flow of things. This place clearly has rules. Slow ones. Your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Maltese temples often featured ritual basins or stone bowls at key junctures, especially near doorways or sacred thresholds. These were likely used for libations, offerings, or symbolic purification. In some cases, they contained ash, bone fragments, or traces of oils and herbs. Your quirky tidbit. One dig site revealed a basin filled with, not kidding, hundreds of snail shells arranged in a spiral. Were they symbolic? A snack. A snail graveyard. One researcher jokingly dubbed it gastropod grotto, but the name stuck in academic papers. The mystery remains. Historians still argue whether the shells held religious significance or were just leftovers from a ritual feast. Some claim they symbolized rebirth due to the spiral shape mirroring other temple motifs. Others think snails were simply abundant and made convenient, if chewy, hors d'oeuvre. You crouch beside this bowl and study the painted shell. Someone, thousands of years ago, knelt right where you are and decorated that same tiny spiral with a steady hand and purpose you'll never quite understand. Maybe it was for a ceremony. Maybe it was just art therapy with pigment and gastropods. From here, a low doorway beckons. You duck beneath it and enter the smallest chamber yet. Barely more than a nook. It smells earthy, mossy, even and cold. Cold enough that your skin prickles. Not unpleasant, just surprising. There's something carved into the far wall. You move closer. It's not a spiral this time. It's a snail. A literal, unmistakable carving of a snail, shell and all. No artistic interpretation here, just a carefully etched, slightly cartoonish gastropod with a wide spiral and stubby antennae that look like they're throwing up peace signs. You blink. The lines are faint but deliberate. And wait, there's more. Beneath the snail, a line of dots, like a trail, like someone carved the journey of the snail, dot by dot, until it reached its little stone self at the end. You run your fingers along the trail, smooth, deliberate, and then, without warning, your stomach growls. Because of course it does. Snails and sacred bowls and fig trees are all well and good. But even ancient reverence has limits when you're running on empty. You sit cross-legged in the nook, imagining what the ancient builders ate during breaks like this. Probably bread, probably cheese, possibly snails, hopefully with herbs. You imagine one builder grumbling to another, "If I see one more spiral today, I'm going to live in a straight line just to spite the gods," and the other, chewing slowly, replies, "The snails don't seem to mind." You chuckle to yourself, quietly. The snail on the wall seems to approve. The air is perfectly still. This chamber may not have hosted grand ceremonies, but it feels private, secretive, like a place someone might have come to think, or hide, or trace snails on a wall when they were supposed to be inventorying grain. You stay a little longer, because that seems like the point. You stretch your legs with the reluctant grace of someone who knows they're leaving something oddly important behind. That tiny snail etching with its whimsical antennae and quiet mystery, it sticks with you. But temples, like thoughts, aren't meant to be lived in forever. You move on. The next corridor bends like a lazy elbow. You walk slowly, not because your feet are tired, but because the air has thickened again, calm and dense, like the walls are gently pressing you forward. Or maybe just making sure you don't run. You pass another shallow basin, empty this time except for a pebble and a single beetle doing a very dedicated lap around it. Bless its tiny legs. The passage opens, and you step into the most dramatic room yet. It's a dome. Not massive, but proportionally perfect. The ceiling curves like the inside of an eggshell, smooth and unbroken except for a central skylight. A circular shaft that lets in a glowing, angled beam of sunlight. It cuts the room in two like a divine sun laser. You imagine standing in its center and suddenly being bestowed with the power to summon fig trees or speak fluent snail. In the middle of the floor, a low platform carved with spiral patterns and holes just large enough for, you guessed it, snails, or incense burners, or fingers. The ambiguity is part of the charm now. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many Maltese temples were constructed with architectural precision that allowed sunlight to enter through specific openings at solstices or equinoxes. These were intentional alignments that marked the movement of celestial bodies and possibly dictated the timing of rituals or agricultural events. Your quirky tidbit. In one particularly well-preserved temple, the light entering during the winter solstice perfectly illuminates a small carved snail on the eastern wall. This has led to passionate debates in niche circles about whether the ancients revered the snail as a seasonal guide or if it's just a cosmic coincidence. Historians still argue whether these alignments were practical agricultural markers or purely symbolic. Some propose they served as spiritual gateways, portals to commune with the sun, moon, and stars. Others suggest a simpler motive, aesthetics and timing. If you're going to build a temple, might as well make the light do a cool thing, right? You step into the shaft of sunlight, half expecting something profound. Instead, it's warm, really warm, like the exact temperature you'd want in a post-nap afternoon. The kind of warmth that makes you consider laying down and letting your thoughts evaporate for a bit. You don't, but you almost do. Instead, you walk the circle of the dome's interior, examining the walls. Low benches line the perimeter stone slabs that might have seated priests, petitioners, or goat herders waiting their turn to offer snail tributes. The benches are grooved from where one has a small spiral etched near the edge, as if someone got bored mid-ceremony and decided to doodle. Artistic rebellion, 3000 BCE style. As you circle, your footsteps echo softly, just enough to make the dome feel alive, like it remembers voices, chants, maybe whispered arguments about whether to follow the snails west this season, or just stay put and risk missing the cosmic gastropod alignment. A breeze swirls in through the skylight, stirring the dust into lazy spirals. You breathe in deeply, catching the scent of dry stone, fig bark, and something faintly herbal rosemary, maybe, or thyme. or the ghost of a temple feast long past. And then strangely a hum, not electronic, not mystical, just your own ears catching the acoustics of the space. You hum a note softly and hear it echo back, crisp and round. This dome was built to carry sound, to hold it gently and offer it back without distortion. You try a few more tones, higher, then lower. Each one blooms against the walls and folds around you like a sleepy hug from the past. You wonder if ceremonies here were musical, if chants once resonated in these frequencies, if someone, long ago, sat right where you're standing and sang into the stone just to hear themselves belong. You sit on the nearest bench and close your eyes. The hum fades. The breeze settles. The shaft of light shifts ever so slightly as the sun continues its slow, unstoppable journey. You stay still, because temples teach patience, and maybe snails weren't just symbols of slowness. Maybe they were teachers. Eventually, the sunbeam creeps off the platform and slides across the bench beside you, illuminating a small pile of lichen that looks like it's contemplating its next move. You stand, stretch not quite cat-like, but close, and follow the curved wall toward the only exit you haven't taken yet. The air here is warmer, still touched by the light you just left, and your footsteps feel just a hair heavier than before. The passage narrows again, forcing you to brush against both walls as you move. There's something cozy about it, like being inside a very considerate sandwich, the kind with freshly baked bread and just enough room to breathe. The stone feels warmer here, more textured, like it's trying to tell you something through your fingertips. You pretend to listen, and then, a sudden dip. You step down into a sloping corridor carved into the bedrock, barely lit by tiny holes poked high in the ceiling. Light peeks through like it's playing hide-and-seek. The incline is gentle, but deliberate. You're descending. As your eyes adjust, you realize you're in a different part of the complex altogether. The walls are darker, smoother, less decorated. But ahead, just at the edge of the glow, is a large, rounded opening. You walk toward it, drawn by a faint breeze and something that smells oddly like wood smoke and mint. You arrive in what can only be described as a vestibule carved into the earth's patience. Low, wide, and curved like a gourd. A fire pit, long unused, sits in the middle, ringed by blackened stones. Around it, more benches this time with deep seats and armrests. These were clearly VIP benches. You take one. Of course you do. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Some Maltese temple complexes were connected to underground chambers believed to be used for oracles, ritual dreaming, or elite ceremonies. Hypogeum halsafliani, for instance, features acoustic chambers that can amplify certain frequencies and induce trance-like states. Not your average backyard gazebo, your quirky tidbit. One of these subterranean temples includes a niche where bones were found arranged in starburst patterns. Among the bones, a single carved figurine of a woman holding, yes, a snail. Was it a goddess, a protector, or just someone showing off their new pet? Theories abound, none of them boring. Historians still argue whether these spaces were primarily spiritual or scientific. Were they used for rituals of healing, astronomical calculations, or just really exclusive cheese-tasting clubs held underground for the sake of drama and acoustics? You lean back into the bench's cool stone. It cradles you like it's been waiting for centuries. The chamber is silent, except for the whisper of air threading through the ceiling vents. You try another hum low and steady, and the sound curls back at you, richer. This time, deeper, almost choral. You speak a word, just one. Snail. And the echo answers, not mockingly, but with a kind of amused dignity. This place loves a good whisper. You picture a gathering here, a dozen or so figures in layered linen, heads bowed, breathing in the scent of herbs and earth. Listening as a priest, or maybe just an exceptionally confident shepherd, speaks slowly into the stillness. The words don't matter. The echo does. The silence that follows, that was the point. You stand again, walking once around the chamber. The walls are faintly lined with markings, more spirals. Yes, but also starbursts, dots, even what looks like an early attempt at a calendar. Each carving is just deep enough to catch dust and shadow. You pause at one particular spiral, nearly 3 feet across, with a faint groove leading from its center to the base of the wall. You trace it with a fingertip. It's not just a spiral, it's a maze. One path in, one way out. Or maybe it's a metaphor for thought. You sit back down. This whole journey, sunlight, snails, fig leaves, underground echoes. It's starting to feel less like a history lesson and more like a meditation. The island itself has been rehearsing for millennia. You're not being taught, you're being absorbed. A sound rises again, faint but real this time. Not from you. Dripping water. Somewhere beyond this chamber, deep in the rock. A spring still trickles. The pulse of the island. You close your eyes and let it count time for you. Slowly, and then, because even sacred spaces need a little levity, something rustles near your foot. You look down. It's a snail. Real. Alive. Sliding unbothered across the stone floor like it owns the place. And honestly, maybe it does. You smile and sit still, letting it pass without interruption. Because sometimes, history is watching a snail on a sacred bench and realizing, just maybe you've been moving at the right pace all along. You sit with the snail longer than any reasonable modern human probably would. It glides along, antenna twitching like a slow-motion weather vane, oblivious to your spiritual awakening. You don't even check your phone, partly because you left it outside the temple in a moment of theatrical reverence, and partly because this moment is oddly complete. Eventually, the little gastropod veers off toward a hairline crack in the stone floor and disappears with all the urgency of a drifting cloud. You stand again, brushing dust from your hands, and walk toward another narrow passage branching off the chamber. You don't even hesitate now. These tunnels feel more like gentle invitations than mysteries. You step into a corridor lined with shelves, stone alcoves carved with careful hands. Each niche is large enough for a small offering. A carved figure here, a bowl fragment there. One or two snail shells placed with what feels like intention. There's even a tiny, sun-bleached goat skull tucked into one recess, its hollow eye socket staring at eternity like a disappointed librarian. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Archaeological digs in Malta have recovered dozens of ritual objects from temple niches figurines, pottery shards, and animal remains, most likely tied to seasonal ceremonies or fertility rites. These were not just places of worship, they were places of memory. Your quirky tidbit. One excavation turned up a perfect miniature temple carved from limestone, just 6 inches tall, complete with a tiny sun portal, snail etchings, and on one side a winking face. Was it a child's toy, a ritual dollhouse, or just ancient trolling? Scholars haven't stopped arguing since. Historians still argue whether these niches served purely religious purposes or acted more like ancient libraries, places to store stories, items of power, or reminders of community history. Some even suggest they were personal shrines, specific to certain families or travelers, marking both memory and presence like a stone guestbook. You find yourself pausing at one of the deeper alcoves. It's empty except for a scattering of moss and one perfectly balanced pebble, round and smooth as an eye. You are tempted to place something of your own, but all you have is a breath. So you offer that softly and move on. The corridor turns again and descends gently into another round chamber, smaller this time. You can tell it's not for ceremonies. It's too intimate. This was a place for rest, or stories, or maybe just waiting. The walls are scrawled with faint markings, more casual, more layered, like a journal without dates. Spirals tangled with stars, a few lines shaped like waves, even something suspiciously resembling a stylized fig. You sit again, because clearly that's what this room is for. Sitting, remembering, maybe even dreaming with your eyes open. In this room, the air shifts in a way that feels seasonal, a little cooler, touched with the scent of wet earth. You wonder if it aligns with a spring breeze or a solstice gust. Some part of the architecture seems to catch air and filter it here with the tenderness of a whisper. You imagine a woman sitting across from you 3,000 years ago. Maybe she's a healer. Maybe she just needed a break from her children. She holds a piece of cheese wrapped in fig leaf and hums softly to herself while a snail climbs her sandal. She doesn't swat it away. You don't ask her name. You just keep sitting. After a while, the light shifts ever so slightly. A blade of brightness slices through a slit in the ceiling and lands on a spiral carved into the opposite wall. A slow sundial, a reminder that even stillness moves forward. Eventually, you stand again. You feel like you've borrowed enough quiet from this space. You take a final look at the markings. One symbol catches your eye, a snail curved and perfect, and beside it, a simple handprint. Human, small, maybe a child, maybe someone who wanted to be remembered not with words, but just with presence. You press your own hand beside it, careful not to disturb anything, stone on skin. Now and then, another echo in the endless room of time. You exit the chamber and rejoin the corridor, which now feels more like a familiar trail than a mystery. You've been walking this temple in spirals, each path deeper, each step slower. Like the island wants you to understand something that can't be explained, only felt. You think again of the snail, not as a joke, not as a mascot, but as a metaphor with a shell, always carrying its home, always aware of the ground beneath it, always moving forward slowly, deliberately, meaningfully. And you're starting to get it. You leave the handprint chamber behind, but not really. It lingers with you like a pebble in your shoe, except it's philosophical and doesn't cause blisters. The corridor widens slightly now, and as you walk, your footsteps become softer. The ground changes texture. First, dry stone, then packed earth, and now something strangely cushiony underfoot. Moss. No, too warm. It's woven reed matting. You didn't know ancient temples had this level of interior design? The matting leads into a long, oval room lit by more of those ceiling apertures. What you now recognize as intentional shafts to let sunlight trace the hours. Each ray lands on something. A basin here, a cracked jar there, a carved stone bowl shaped suspiciously like a turtle, all of them perfectly positioned. You could almost imagine someone saying, "No, no, move it 3 snails to the left." That's better. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The ancient Maltese temples often featured specific alignments with seasonal solar events. During solstices and equinoxes, sunlight would enter at calculated angles to highlight ceremonial altars or carvings. In some cases, the architecture appears to predict lunar cycles, not just solar ones. And the quirky tidbit. In 1997, a team of researchers noted that certain chamber alignments also seem to coincide with local patterns of snail migration. Yes, actual snails. Their slow movement across the landscape, seasonally drawn by moisture and shade, mirrored temple corridors. Coincidence? Cute. Cosmic joke? Unclear. Historians still argue whether the temple builders intended these alignments or merely stumbled into them while following topography, animal habits, or even superstition. One particularly passionate academic suggested that the builders were trying to sync sacred ritual with natural rhythms, snails included, to remind everyone that patience is holy. You trail a finger along the nearest stone bowls. It's smooth but worn, as if thousands of hands have paused here. Inside are the remains of something, traces of dried pigment, reddish-brown, ochre. Maybe you imagine someone mixing it with water and snail slime to paint symbols that have long since washed away. Artistic snails. There's a thought. You move on to the basin. It's cracked now, but still holds a bit of rainwater caught from a recent drizzle. You squat and peer in. Your reflection wobbles half you, half stone. Something about it feels ceremonial. You almost nod to yourself. There are fewer carvings in this space, but more objects. Some clearly sacred miniature altars, a sun-shaped medallion chipped on one edge, some domestic a spindle, a broken comb. It's like you've wandered into a hybrid between a holy room and your grandmother's attic. You don't hate it. A small shelf-like ledge hugs the back wall, littered with snail shells. You can't tell if they were collected with reverence or just swept here by time. But their placement feels oddly curated. Some arranged in rows, others in tight clusters, like family portraits. One is dyed with faint green pigment, probably copper residue. You sit again, because of course, there's a bench. The builders thought of everything. You sit and watch the sunbeam crawl across the room like it's on a schedule, nudging you gently toward contemplation. You imagine a priestess here before you, seated just the same. Maybe she's not grand. Maybe she's tired. Maybe she's been explaining to initiates all day why the snail is sacred and why you shouldn't interrupt its journey with a broom. Maybe she's wondering, just like you, what parts of this space still hold meaning. You try to picture the rituals, chanting, humming, silence. Maybe it wasn't about performance. Maybe it was about witnessing, letting the light land where it will, letting the snail cross when it does. One sunbeam reaches the wall, and hits a small carving almost too faint to see. You lean in. It's a series of spirals, each one slightly larger than the last, etched carefully into a gentle slope. You get it now. It's not just decoration, it's the story of everything moving outward. Always, slowly, but with purpose. You sit a while longer, long enough for the light to shift, for your breath to slow again. And just when you think the space has nothing else to give, you hear it. A gentle tapping. Drip, drip. You follow the sound, almost crawling now, and find a narrow crevice to your right. You lean in. A trickle of water seeps from a mineral-stained pipe of stone. It lands in a hollowed-out bowl carved directly into the floor, no bigger than your cupped hand. It's rhythmic, mesmerizing. Not quite music, but close. You dip your fingers in the bowl. The water is cool, not just physically, but emotionally. It's like it's telling you, yeah, you're doing fine. You whisper thank you, even though you're not sure to whom. Maybe the temple hears you, or maybe it's the snail. Either way, you're okay with it. The drip continues behind you, steady as a heartbeat you didn't know the temple had. You step away from it like leaving a lullaby mid-note. Your feet find the reed mat again, now slightly damp at the edges. You trail your fingers along the wall as you move. Not for balance, but for reassurance, as though the stones are your old friends now, nodding at you as you pass. Soon, the matting gives way to smoother stone. Your steps echo again, quietly, like tiptoeing in a museum you accidentally got locked in overnight. Ahead, the corridor opens into yet another chamber. This one taller than the rest, and brighter. A dome. You realize, or what's left of one, part of the roof has caved slightly, letting in beams of light and tufts of plant life that shouldn't be thriving in stone, but are doing it anyway. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Some of Malta's temple roofs were constructed with corbelled domes, layers of stone placed in concentric circles, gradually tapering inward until sealed. While many collapsed over time, their ruins still show that the builders mastered load-bearing mechanics without mortar or metal. And here's your quirky tidbit. In the rubble of one partially collapsed dome, archaeologists once found a bowl of hardened curds, ancient cheese, preserved like a dairy time capsule. Scientists examined it and determined it was made of goat's milk, spiced with fennel seeds, and possibly stored for ceremonial use. Or maybe someone just forgot lunch. Either way, it smelled like legend. Historians still argue whether these domed chambers were reserved for elite rituals or simply doubled as astronomical observatories. The placement of ceiling apertures seems to mirror constellations, but whether that was intentional or just stargazers seeing what they wanted to see is anyone's guess. You look up through the broken dome now. The sky stretches, wide and blue, feathered with lazy clouds. You spot a bird circling above, too small to identify, too graceful to care. You wonder if it's looking for snails. Full circle. Beneath the dome, the room is nearly empty except for 3 standing stones arranged in a triangle. They're not massive. You could hug one if you felt like it, and you kind of do. Each bears faint etchings, spirals again, stars, and what might be a tree. You drift between them slowly. A lazy circuit. The kind people walk when they're trying to remember something or forget. The floor here feels different. Not just smoother, but tuned. As if the stones were chosen not only for strength, but for sound. You stamp one foot lightly. A low hum answers you. Not spooky, just thoughtful. Like the room is clearing its throat. You whisper hello to the tallest stone. It doesn't answer, obviously, but you feel a sense of being observed, not judged, just noticed. Like the universe's version of a nod, you sit again. Because you've learned that stillness is part of the ritual here. You pick up a small pebble and roll it in your palm. It's warm. You wonder if a priestess once held it while reciting prayers to the stars, or if a bored teenager flicked it across the room during a too-long ceremony about barley. The room feels balanced, symmetrical. You close your eyes and listen. Distant wind, a soft chirp, one last drip from the corridor behind you. All of it arranged like a lullaby written by architects who understood sleep as a sacred act. You lie back now, gently. The stone is hard, yes, but not unfriendly. Above you, the clouds shift again. The broken dome lets you see just enough sky to remember your own smallness. And yet, here you are, lying in a structure that's outlived empires, listening to wind and birds and snails doing what they've always done. You open your eyes again. In one corner of the dome, a stone block sits alone, partly buried under moss. You wander over and clear the top gently with your sleeve. Etched into the surface is a spiral. Within a spiral, within a spiral. Like the other carvings, but this one goes deeper, literally. A groove has been worn into the center by countless fingers. Or perhaps snails. You touch it. Cool. Smooth. Like a memory you don't have but want anyway. You look around and finally understand. This room wasn't about ceremony or spectacle. It was a place to remember but not events. More like feelings, rhythms, the way the wind moved through the reeds, the way cheese tasted under a full moon, the way your breath synced with the night sky. The spiral groove draws your gaze again, not inward, but onward. It tells you it's time to go deeper. Just one more chamber. Maybe just one more step. You stand again, slowly, leave the dome behind. You don't look back. After all, the snail never does. The corridor narrows now, no surprise. You've learned by now that temples don't end with grand exits. They trail off, like sleepy thoughts or forgotten conversations. The passage curves, dips slightly, and takes on a darker hue. The kind that implies you're not exactly supposed to be here. Not in a forbidden sense, more in a whispered, "Are you sure?" kind of way. You continue anyway, because snails don't hesitate. Or if they do it with style. Soon, the walls change texture, less polished stone, more jagged earth. Almost like you've stepped beyond the official blueprint of the temple and into the builder's secrets. Your fingertips graze the uneven surface. It's cooler here, and the air carries a new scent. Something like damp soil, but sharper, metallic. No, more like memory. Your path ends in a small circular chamber. No dome here, no altar, just quiet. Dead center lies a flat stone slab, maybe 4 feet across. No carvings, no embellishments, just stone. But the slab is framed, yes, framed by small upright stones set in a circle. 16 of them, each no taller than your knee. You step closer, careful not to disturb anything, as if someone might suddenly emerge and shush you for scuffing their sacred geometry. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Archaeologists refer to these small megalithic circles as ritual precincts. Many exist in Malta, particularly at Menastra and Hagar Chim. They likely served as focal points for offerings, seasonal gatherings, or small group ceremonies. But what happened in them? Well, that part is mostly educated guesswork. And your quirky tidbit: in one such circle, researchers found not only charred bone fragments but also dozens of intact snail shells arranged in pairs. Were they symbolic? A snack? Or something stranger? No one can say. Some even hypothesize the shells represented celestial bodies in miniature snail galaxies. If you will, historians still argue whether these spaces were primarily spiritual or astronomical. Some say they were used to mark lunar eclipses. Others suggest birth and death rituals. One even proposed they were ancient sound chambers for humming-based healing. You know, like Neolithic spas. If spas smelled faintly of moss and goat cheese, you sit again, this time with more intention. The slab in front of you feels like an invitation, not to act, just to notice. The upright stones each cast soft, slanting shadows in the low light, forming a kind of slow-moving clock. You blink, and the shadows have shifted. Time is dancing around you now, not in a rush, just circling. You reach down and pick up a loose piece of limestone. It's shaped like a wedge of pie. You chuckle. The universe knows your favorite snacks. You set it down gently on the slab, just to see what happens. Nothing happens, of course, and yet something feels different. You've contributed to the space now, even if only with a crumb of intention. You lean back against the wall. It's chilly, but in that calming way, like sticking your hand into a bag of dried lentils. Grounding. Real. The spiral symbol hums in the back of your mind. You close your eyes and imagine the room in use. Long ago, maybe there was incense or music made from reeds. Maybe someone stood exactly where you're sitting and whispered something into the stone, trusting it to hold the secret. Or maybe the chamber existed for a simpler reason, a pause. a breath, a reminder to just be. You stretch out one leg, then the other. You listen. No birds here, no wind, just the subtle creak of your own joints and a faint drip somewhere in the distance, echoing its slow lullaby. You lie back on the floor, cold seeps in through your clothes, but it's not unpleasant. It makes you more aware of your limbs, of the space between your breaths, of the steady, ongoing patience of stone. Overhead, a single shaft of light filters through a tiny aperture no wider than your thumb. The ray lands right on the center of the stone slab, catching the edge of your pie-shaped limestone piece. A smile tugs at the corner of your mouth. You didn't plan that, but the temple did. You close your eyes again. The temple breathes around you. You breathe with it. Time passes, or maybe it folds in on itself like a spiral. When you open your eyes again, the light has shifted. The little shadow has grown longer, reaching out to touch the nearest upright stone. You've been there longer than you thought, but not too long, just long enough. You sit up, stretch, brush dust from your back. Then you step out of the circle, careful not to disturb your offering. The passage waits for you, leading back the way you came. But something inside you has already turned toward the final chamber, toward whatever comes next. Because if snails taught you anything, it's that the journey is the point. Even if you move slowly, and even if no one else understands why, especially then, you follow the corridor as it gently curves, narrowing again, then widening. Not unlike the rhythm of a breath or the unspooling curl of a snail's shell. There's a subtle incline now, barely noticeable except in the slight tug at your calves. Your fingers graze the wall as you walk. It's warmer than before, dry, as if this chamber had been waiting longer than the others, waiting just for you. Eventually, the path opens into a wide, low-ceilinged room, shaped almost like a heart rounded edges. No hard corners. The light here doesn't come from above. It filters sideways, through thin slits carved near the floor, letting in golden dusk. The effect is soft, almost underwater-like. You blink once, twice, and let your eyes adjust. You breathe slower without realizing. At the center of the chamber sits a round basin shallow, carved from a single block of limestone. The basin holds a thin pool of water, still and silent. And around the rim, more carvings. Spirals again. Yes, but also stars, waves, a bird, a goat, maybe, and one very smug-looking snail. You crouch beside the basin and peer into the water. And there you are, sort of. The reflection is you, but quieter, gentler. A version of yourself who never rushes, never worries about deadlines, and doesn't care if cheese ages an extra month. This version of you is patient enough to watch clouds change direction, or to follow a migrating snail just to see where it's headed. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many ancient Maltese temples included libation basins thought to be used for ceremonial washings, offerings of oil or milk, or observational tools during celestial events. Their placement in final chambers suggests symbolic purification or transition points, thresholds between spaces or states of being. And your quirky tidbit. One basin discovered near the Temple of Tarxian bore scorch marks along the inner rim. Archaeologists still debate whether this was from ritual fire, ancient cooking mishaps, or just a prehistoric barbecue gone rogue. Some even joke it was an early hot tub for sacred snails, which, frankly, you now wish were true. Historians still argue whether the last chamber in each temple was reserved for the high priestess, the community elders, or simply the sunrise. Some say these final rooms were about rebirth. Others claim they represented the womb of the earth, a return to silence, to darkness, before emerging into the world again. You sit cross-legged beside the basin, not in reverence, not even in curiosity, just in peace. You reach out and touch the water. It's cool, as expected. But the ripple it makes seems to echo deeper than it should. The spiral in the center of the basin blurs, then reforms, as if reminding you, this is not the end, just a pause. A gentle swirl before the next coil. You close your eyes. The sounds around you are faint now, not because they're gone, but because your own thoughts have quieted. The breath you take feels older than your lungs. The floor beneath you feels like part of your spine. The stone, the shadow, the story all still here, and always have been. You open your eyes once more and look at the carvings. That smug snail stares back at you, unfazed by millennia. You smile. He wins. You stand slowly, stretch like a cat, and look back at the corridor that led you here. You could leave now, or you could stay just a little longer. And so, you do. You sit one last time. Facing the basin, you imagine the sky outside dimming further, the slits of golden light narrowing until they're thin blue blades, then gone. The chamber grows darker, warmer, sleepier. Even the smug snail softens a little. And so do you. You stay there for a while, listening to the hum of nothingness, that deep, settled silence that only ancient places can offer. It's not empty. It's full of breaths long since taken, of footsteps that never hurried, of stories whispered, not shouted. You let your body sink into the coolness of the stone beneath you. The walls don't press in, they cradle. The air wraps around you like a worn woolen blanket, comforting in its weight, soothing in its stillness. Outside, the last hints of twilight are fading. Stars begin to wink their way into view. Somewhere far away, a snail may be making its epic journey across a damp leaf, unaware of its architectural legacy. And that's fine. Not everything needs to know it's important to be important. You lie back fully now, eyes half open, breathing in, breathing out. No rush, no agenda, just this moment, this story, this stillness. The spiral winds inward again, a rhythm, a memory, a cradle. You follow it gently, slowly, until you reach the center of the quiet. There, the breath is deeper, the light is softer, the stones smile in their sleep. And you finally drift, at peace with snails, and cheese, and time.